What secret did you once know that has since become public knowledge? I am a patent lawyer, so lots of inventions that most people would find pretty boring, they usually eventually publish. You should do a AMA, I would interested in that. I worked for Warner Brothers Games Division back in 2008 or so. They sent out some company-wide email jerking off about whatever big meeting they had and bragging about all the games that would be coming down the pipeline. Everyone on the floor got it at the same time, took one look and said a variation of WTF as Mad Max Fury Road. Not 2 minutes later there was a hastily written email explaining in very bold letters that internal communications are confidential and subject to NDA, etc. We'll fire you. I read Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows 3 weeks before it was available everywhere. No connections. A small bookstore in suburban South Korea either A, didn't get the memo they weren't supposed to put it on shelves until the 21st of July. Books having a release date is a foreign concept in Korea, or B, didn't care. I was the same in Canada though, and I only got it a bit over a week early from a bookstore that had put it out on the shelf. The irony is that I wasn't even that into the series. The only other book I own is the first. I only bought it because the hype was so huge and I was curious. I was reading it the next day on the bus and almost got attacked by some nutjob woman over it. I knew my best friend was sleeping with our middle school gym teacher from the time he was 15 years old. The rumors spread the rest of my school time all the way through high school. When he was 20, they moved in together for almost a year. Then everybody knew it was true. My astronomy professor in first year told my class about the very high probability that gravitational waves had been detected a week before they were officially announced. I was working at CERN when the Higgs boson discovery was announced. The ATLAS and CMS results were meant to be secret within each of the experiments. The days leading up to the press conference there was a bit of a buzz in the air. Everyone planning BBQs for the evening and stockpiling champagne. All for no particular reason of course. Did a full series of artwork for the toy lineup for Avengers Infinity War. All the heroes in all their new outfits. I think most have been revealed by now though. This was over a year ago. Was cool to work on. I know a dude who got to read the scripts for Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith way ahead of time for a very similar reason. This isn't super cool, but back in middle school, my best friend's mom worked for some sort of vending machine company and got to try Snickers peanut butter before it came out to the public. So I just got to try a pretty good candy bar a few weeks before it was released to everyone else. Back in 2012 I knew WF was opening unauthorized banking accounts. A banker opened 9 unauthorized business checking and savings accounts in my name. I became very suspicious when I received 9 debt cards in the mail in the following weeks. I panicked thinking someone stole my identity. I had to go to 3 WF banks before someone told me they had their suspicions that the banker was just trying to hit a monthly quotas to bonus. I freaked out and made them close all accounts. My husband is still convinced I was one of the first whistleblowers. Hardly a secret, but I knew Holly Willoughby was doing a baby cookbook before said baby cookbook came out because I overheard someone involved with the production talking loudly on the phone about it during a train journey. That the risk associated with mortgage-backed securities was not being truthfully assessed and that the originators didn't give flying frick about the risk since they were able to sell them off 5 seconds after the deal was done, so the risk was no longer theirs. I remember hearing stories and thinking that I must be misunderstanding because they couldn't possibly be true. I didn't think it strongly enough to short the market though. My friend's dad worked for Paramount Pictures and used one of her sleepovers as an opportunity to show us 13-14 years old girls a screener VHS of Mean Girls, so we knew how awesome it was before it hit theaters. That's pretty dang fetch. In 2002 to 2003 I was living in a beach town and had a homosexual neighbor who was very flamboyant and over the top. We were pretty new to the area and he took us under his wing and showed us around town and especially loved all the gossip. However, a lot of his stories seemed very far-fetched and exaggerated. Like for instance, he supposedly had all these well-to-do family in mansions along the beach, but they never spoke to him or came over. He lived in a very modest ranch style, but he swore he was to inherit all these properties in a few years and such. Despite these perceived fantasies, we still liked hanging out with him and just brushed it off. Now, he got a lot of his gossip and drama news because he worked for a beach town resort that was pretty popular in the summer. Or so we thought. He did work for a hotel, but it was a much smaller, rinky-dink kinda one and not the grand one located on the beach like we originally thought. We let it slide. Big deal, right? One afternoon during some wine coolers and board games, he starts to tell us about this private, hidden nude beach that he and his boyfriend liked to go to and how the previous weekend he had ran into our governor there with his boyfriend. He described in detail the escapades he witnessed and the governor's boyfriend. We listened but just kinda let it go in one ear and out the other. Just another one of his wild tales. For sure. He never let this one go, though. For over a year, he'd update us on the news whenever he was in town and such. We knew of course he liked to vacation in our town. He broke his leg here, after all, but he was with his wife on that beach during the incident and he was twice married to women and had 2 children. Surely just another fantasy of his or something. Well, sure as frick in 2004 some crap happened where our governor announced he was gay and came out about his boyfriend before resigning as governor and being the first openly gay one in history. Color us all shocked when we had known all along. The government killed almost all of the lobsters in the Long Island Sound when using a new pesticide to spray for mosquitoes and paid all of the lobster fishermen large sums of money with tax dollars to avoid owning up to it. Wait, that still may not be public info. FBI, don't you fricking move. I knew about Patton Oswalt's wife's death before the press. A friend of mine is friends with Patton and he was in town for the Moon Tower Comedy Festival that year and we met up for coffee before his set and he told me about what had happened. I think that was the same day Prince died. Dang, that one broke my heart. You could tell he really cared about her and the whole thing crushed him. I do consulting work for a major automaker. I've known about new cars and seen pictures weeks before details were revealed. People are looking at crappy camo spaceships and speculating about specs on Jalopnik and our cars while I have high-res images and full specs. As a car guy, it's kind of cool knowing before everyone else. I knew about the Dorito taco at Taco Bell weeks before everyone else. We had signs in the back preparing us for the reveal. I knew it was my friend Kirby that was regularly crapping on the floor in front of the toilet in the bathroom in high school. Some kid walked in on him doing it and told everyone. I'm guessing out of the 2,200 kids in our high school 2,000 of them probably heard about it. My mom worked for A&P Corporate so she would bring home snacks for us that didn't hit the shelves yet. It was pretty cool. Some of the first things we were able to try were Doritos 3D, Sprite Remix, and the cereal bars with the milk frosting on the bottom. Somewhat the envy of our lunchrooms. Tell them to bring Sprite Remix back. Wasn't really a secret rather than it not hitting stateside yet. My grandma came back from China with toys for me and my brother. They were Beyblades. These were legit compared to the ones that were released in America from what I assume were looser safety regulations. More durable plastic with a heavy metal weight in the center that was actually designed to create sparks when it hit the other Beyblade. We didn't understand what they were or how to play with them so we kind of just shoved them underneath our beds till the anime became big. These things actually tore through the plastic on the American versions and it actually made my brother bleed once. The split up of Gavin Rossdale and Gwen Stefani. My wife's friend's sister was their nanny and we found out a month before it came out and was sworn not to tell anyone. The best bit was, all the tabloid blamed the nanny. So friend's sister called Gwen and asked her to set everyone straight and Gwen said no you can't do that and to wait it out and it will blow over. My wife's friend's sister, sworn not to tell anyone. I see that went about as well as could be expected. My husband had a short-term contract at BioWare several years back. I got to see DA2 and ME3 in development. I know, people have opinions about those particular BioWare titles, but it was still a very cool experience that I couldn't tell any of my friends about at the time. I had to sign an NDA to get past the front desk every single time I brought him lunch. My dad had a friend that worked for BioWare too and could never talk too much about his work. His name is written on a wall somewhere in DA2 that I found one time. My mom worked at Boeing in the early 2000s and knew about military drones before we all did. She really didn't say anything about them until they were announced either. We were just watching the news and she was like, oh, they're finally releasing that to the public? We have a Wisconsin company right now that has a patent and fully operational prototypes on military drones that can be launched and landed while base vehicle is in motion regardless of how fast or slow it is moving. I knew this about 10 years ago at least, so I'm not exactly sure where things sit today. I went to the Canadian premiere of The Last Jedi, so I knew all the spoilers 3 days before anyone else. It's actually really lonely because you can't talk about it with anyone. Those days were the height of my anxiety. I had to avoid the internet because people actually went out of their way to try and spoil it for me. Luckily I went and surprised that Jimmy Savile was a child raping son of a bee. This was back in the late 80s. It wasn't exactly a state secret. Many people knew. It's just the media that wouldn't talk about it. As for the fricking BBC, strange that even to this day they still don't mention all those corpses he fricked when he volunteered to work in the mortuary at Stoke Mandeville Hospital, or what he did during the long time he spent alone with the corpse of his adored mother. Or what he did during the long time he spent alone with the corpse of his adored mother. I knew Savile was a psycho, but I didn't know he was psycho. That Matt Lauer was a creep. My college roommate worked on the Today Show and always had stories. The only thing shocking about him getting fired was that it took a cultural movement to get him out. I don't know if this counts, but my father worked for Hasbro and I got to test a lot of the toys before they came out. This was a long time ago, so it was mostly My Little Pony stuff lol, but it was pretty cool. I loved My Little Pony when I was growing up. I had a ton. But then my grandma showed me an article in the newspaper where some girl had 300 plus ponies because her dad worked for Hasbro and I was so jealous. I know I'm not alone, but I took a tour of the Disney Animation Studio in the early 1990s and saw them working on the Roger Rabbit short Roller Coaster Rabbit that was released with Don Tracy. I managed to see the animator's shot list with the title of the short. Took a tour in December 1999 and saw them working on The Emperor's New Groove. It was called Kingdom of the Sun then, and I remember watching for this movie to come out. Took me a while to figure out the name changed, an embarrassingly number of years. That there was going to be a spin-off show of The Big Bang Theory. My little brother auditioned for young Sheldon about a year ago. Because of him, there are lots of TV shows and movies that I know about pretty early on that I can't tell anyone about. Same show but different source. Basically the guy who plays Sheldon's dad in that show is a longtime friend of the guy whose kids I sometimes babysit. So that's how I found out about the spin-off. Literally the knew a guy who knew a guy story. My dad worked for Acura when the first Avengers movie came out. Acura put a lot of funding into the movie, which is why most of the cars you see are Acuras. And as part of the promotion, employees of certain dealerships were able to see it a day early with their families. It was surprising to see how much security they had. A girl with a metal detector probed you over before you entered the theater. You had to leave all electronics outside. And there were a couple of dudes up front with night vision goggles that just watched us the whole time. I knew the new hot girl in school everyone was talking about was transgender. She was tall and thin and was very cool. She told everyone she had moved there from Europe. She wore very expensive stylish dresses in an era where girls wore JNCOs and boyish clothes, so she was a breath of fresh air. Everyone was talking about her, and to be honest she was very pretty. If I hadn't known prior I might have gotten caught up in the hype. The summer before that school year I worked at a fast food restaurant at a theme park. Back then, mid-90s, there wasn't social media, so you rarely interacted with kids outside of your high school unless you were in sports or something like that. This job brought kids from all over town to work in the same place. I dated a girl from a school that was about 20 miles away and she told me about this really good looking gay kid from her school who she had a crush on a few years before. He came back to school after summer break and started dressing as a girl. He was mocked relentlessly. The story she told me was he was born with both sex organs and had surgery as a baby to make him a boy. Probably just gossip she picked up. And he was raised a boy but always felt like a girl, so when he got old enough he decided to live his life as a girl. He was bullied terribly and eventually left school. She showed me his picture so I remembered what he looked like. When the new girl showed up I recognized her immediately. I felt terribly for her. No way in the world I was going to let that secret out of the bag and ruin her life. The thing that made that so hard is she was such an butthole. She was arrogant and would make fun of other girls and laugh at boys that were too nerdy, and she herself was a bully to an extent. I came close to letting the cat out of the bag when a super douche guy at our school started dating her and bragged about how they fricked all the time and how she was so dirty in bed. I really wanted to tell him his girlfriend had a dong, but I didn't. It eventually did come out when a guy transferred to our school and had played soccer with him at the previous school. All freaking heck broke loose. She tried to deny it, but he brought in a yearbook and it was clearly her. She left our school about a week later and I heard she transferred to another local high school. Never heard how it went though. Hope it worked out. Good on you for not outing her. I think one of the hardest things is not letting an butthole turn you into an butthole too. I got to play Pokemon in 1996 when my best friend from Japan brought it back after visiting family. He also brought back Pokemon cards and swore they would be super popular here soon. I thought he was trippin'. The White House pressured the Challenger launch. Reagan was planning on talking to Krista McAuliffe during the State of the Union address. Remember, this was right after Iran-Contra. Firecall was a client of mine. And that they almost lost Atlantis on the second mission after the RTF. Only reason it didn't blow was a slightly thicker aluminum plate on that particular section of the underbelly. How to pause a Tamagotchi. As an Orthodox Jew, I'm not allowed to touch electronic devices for 25 hours once a week, and when we were kids our Tamagotchis rarely survived the weekend. Then we discovered that if you went to adjust the current time but didn't save it, it would simply wait until you did. It effectively put the Tamagotchi in suspended animation. We were the most popular kids in school for a while when we revealed this secret to the community. And then the next edition of the toy put how to pause it in the instruction manual. That Jim had a thing for Pam. He confided in me on a booze cruise because we are really close friends. He was sad because she was engaged at the time, but you know what? I told him to never, ever give up. Hi Michael. That an archdiocese in New Jersey was harboring sexual predator priests and were going to get sued big time. A place I was working at was involved in supporting the Catholic Church in their case prep. I was a lowly intern at the time and didn't have access to much info, but they were paying us a lot and they paid us very quickly too. The Catholic Church is loaded and they're willing to spend a lot to protect themselves at all costs. From what I heard, we gave them a ridiculously inflated quote that was super high and they paid it all without even bothering to negotiate it down. In HS, I knew we'd all one day be carrying around screen doodads and live our lives through them. Of course, since nobody was back then, people thought I was the weirdo for carrying a PDA. I didn't even have access to live data. I'd have to sync up in the morning to get news and weather, and manually load some video clips onto it. It was a lot more work to be a dork back then. In 1983 to 1987 an interesting friend of the family filled me in on many of the things that were eventually brought to light in the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, and several that weren't. Survivor fans, I ran into Boston Rob and Amber in Mexico on their honeymoon, before they announced their engagement and the fact that their whole wedding would be televised as a 3-hour special. I realized what was up when I asked to take a photo and they said we aren't allowed to, and I noticed the rings. North Korean ballistic missile development having missiles that were able to hit the continental United States. The media acts like it is some new thing, but they've had the technical capability since the mid-90s. Their missiles are just a bit more reliable now. Reliability is what is important here though. Having the know-how doesn't mean anything if you can't produce. I used to work in a TV station that was a WB secondary affiliate. Our small rural market could not support a whole nother transmitter for them, meaning we'd tape the shows off the network's satellite feed and air them later that same week. So I was the first in the state to know if Dawson broke up with Joey or if Pacey had a nosebleed. The hassle though was that about twice every commercial break they'd run a promo for some other show of theirs that we either skipped altogether or had already aired earlier, disturbing their passion. I had to try to cover these promos with our own in-house ones. Of course the tweens that had listservs or whatever about their favorite shows would get unintentional spoilers from the rest of the nation. My secret was only a secret within a 40-mile radius dead zone. There were a few other first-run shows that studios, Egg Fox, would feed to Canada on an unencrypted satellite transponder ahead of their network airtime. They just did them at 6 AM on a Saturday when they figured no one would catch them. Oh, and I heard about George W. Bush's weak conviction before the story broke on air. Friend of a friend was involved in the music industry. He called us and let us know that Michael Jackson had passed at least 2 hours before it hit the news. I found out Bill Cosby was almost completely blind when he performed at my local theater in the early 2010s. He needed help with everything and we, the stage staff, were told to help him move around. It was a huge secret. We weren't allowed to tell anyone. When he announced his blindness following the accusations against him, it felt like he'd been saving that card for a day like that and acted like it was new. It was gross. Can't fool me, Bill. Till Bill Cosby is blind. Tony Blair's daughter attempted suicide while he was in office. The media respected the situation and kept it out of the news. I was sworn to secrecy. One of the biggest Swedish pop hits of the 80s were written in secret by one of the country's most well-known artists. He wrote the song because they needed a hit, and he chose to be anonymous because he didn't want to draw attention from the band. Full stop. I knew that years before it became well known to the public. I was told by a person from the Swedish music industry. It was known among professionals for like 20 years before it got public. My cousin works as reporter for a gossip magazine and knows a lot of things going on in Hollywood that aren't being reported right now. She knew for years what Harvey Weinstein was doing. She said it was an open secret in Hollywood, but a lot of people were too scared to come forward, or if they tried to they would either get blacklisted, threatened with a huge lawsuit, or worse. Apparently one of the main reasons his abuse made headlines was because his brother Bob wanted to have him kicked out of his company. So Bob made the decision to make his abuse known and made sure a few women he knew were abused came forward. Also, there is a huge problem with sexual abuse and child pornography in Hollywood right now, and Mark Salling's death is being investigated by the FBI. They believe it wasn't a suicide but a homicide that was covered up. And apparently most of the child pee they found on his computer were all recent images. They think someone in Hollywood gave it to him, and most of the images were child actors. She also said that people like Steven Spielberg, Charlie Sheen, Bryan Singer and Dan Schneider are known for sexual abusing children. But it's the same problem as with Harvey Weinstein. People are scared to come forward, and if they do try they are blacklisted, sued or threatened by their legal team or worse. I knew my aunt, by marriage, was having an affair years before anyone else in my family did. We had gone to my uncle's house for Christmas one year and I wandered into their bedroom looking for a bathroom, but instead found my aunt with her tongue down one of my uncle's friend's throat. I was like 7 and grew up in a home with no married couples, so I totally didn't get what was going on. And it wasn't until years later when the whole thing, as well as multiple other affairs, came out that I realized and thought to maybe share the information with other members of my family. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.